So we're going to do a little bit of outlining and we're mostly going to ask questions. So I'm not sure how we feel about this quote, but we have previously said we throw strategic intent over the wall and then we call it a delivery failure when goals are not achieved. So what do we mean by that? We are ever talking about the gap between strategy and execution. So much of big is around simply closing the strategy to execution gap. Um, Next slide, David. Okay, so sounds simple. Reality is complex. I'm not even going to attempt to go into this diagram in more detail, but basically there are a number of diagrams very relevant to this discussion in the BOC. And as ever, we encourage you to go and review the BOC and look at those in more detail for yourself. But yeah, how do we close the strategy execution gap? It's complicated.
Yeah, I think the point of this, Veronica, was that if we're trying to get from strategy up in the top left-hand corner, then we have to get it into our organization. And some of us are from a perspective that strategy is primarily about change, which is the portfolio bit on the right. But we've also got to drive that through our business units and maybe even through product teams. So the proposition, I think, proposition is that there's more to strategy delivery than just project delivery. And I think that leads us nicely into your first challenge.
It does. So, challenge one of the night, or question for us to consider is strategy delivery is not just projects, BAU, value creation, change, all compete for leadership funds, resources, and attention. Oh, hello. Anthony already says I have a bit of a different view. Great. Let's hear about it, Anthony. Let's start with the Slido. Pop your comments in there. There's the number. Do you agree with the above? Does your organisation agree with that? And does your organisation behave like this is true? So what do you think? What does your organisation think? And is your organisation congruent with what it says?
So just those that haven't used us worked with us on this Slido stuff before, we try to use Slido just to get our points to pop up and on the screen. So rather than people put their hand up and us not be able to do that, the way we try and capture comments is to comment on them as they appear on here. You can, in fact, if you're using Slido on your phone, say who you are. So if you want to remain anonymous, you can. But if you can say who you are on the app, and then we can refer back to you, unless you truly want to be anonymous, that is. So yes, maybe sometimes I wish. I might actually just flip to the web browser version of this because it's just easy. From memory, it was easier for me to manage it last time.
Can't quite
So
remember the
as they're arriving,
options.
Oh, sorry,
uh,
Vic. So it was number one. What do you think? Do you agree that it's more than just change? Number two, does your organization agree that strategy to execution is more than just change? And then number three, does your organization act like that is true?
okay. So
Can't remember the questions. The answers.
okay, so it's a very current issue. Operations needs clashing with change needs, especially in the CDI area. Yeah, yeah. It's
Agree. And it is
sorry.
complex, not complicated, as you like. Agree with the statement, but my organisation is still a bit confused. Strategy tends to be a think about where we're going and how to get there, but then we forget about it between years. I think we hear that one quite a lot, don't we, David? That it's a sort of infrequent activity rather than an ongoing activity. I believe it. There is a conflict with what is true and the marketing view resource. Yes, there will always be contention between BAU and change for resource. The SMEs, the subject matter experts in BAU, will need to accept and embed change at the very least, and ITIL equals operational readiness. Okay.
Would anyone like to elaborate on their comments?
Well,
we've got.
I typed in the first one. I still can't work out how to put my name on the Slido thing on my phone. Sorry about that. So, looking back at a previous clients, not current clients, yeah, everybody kind of agreed with point one, or but in terms of it working in reality and proper balance between who gets the money, or usually more importantly, who gets the people, and the prioritization for the resource, that was a minefield poison chalice. And whichever operational director screamed loudest seemed to be the way it worked out, rather than any sensible corporate prioritization.
So I've got a sort of question, see if anyone wants to pick it up. If you've got 3 projects and you've got a busy service team, are you just prioritizing the projects, or how are you deciding whether you take time off the operational work and give it to change stuff?
I believe that depends what the priority is on what's going on at the time.
So how do you prioritize between items that are change and items that are business as usual?
Well, that's usually depends on the level of governance that's required and the way the change needs to be managed. That's always been my opinion. That's why I said there was a couple of things I wanted to. Hope you don't mind me jumping in on here, by the way, David. If I'm out of order, let me know.
Discuss. No, please. Well, it's Veronica to manage us, I guess, but just trying to stimulate the conversation.
David, it's how much I can bully, leverage, twist arms to make sure that my projects get priority, whilst haggling and horse trading away to say, well, if you let me have Fred and Mary for the next 4 weeks, I'll give you a nice deliverable in 6 months. Is that the best for the organization? No. Is that the best for my project delivery, portfolio delivery? Absolutely yes. But it's not joined up and it's not sensible.
I mean, some organisations obviously are more mature and have a more objective way of doing, clear, transparent, weighted criteria and all that good stuff. They just seem to be a bit in the minority. Ricardo in the chat has said, my organisation understands that projects are a way to deliver change and transformation, but they haven't understood yet how BAU can also deliver to it.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting. Can I make a comment here, actually, Veronica?
Of course you can. Please do.
Because I was starting to go back to a bit of a point. I don't want to hog everything regarding this BAU product operational approach, as well as project delivery approach. Because from my experience, really, especially coming onto a portfolio business area, there is a correlation between them all, and it depends a lot from a point of view of the differences as to the amount of governance and the amount of control, and I put control in inverted commas, that needs to oversee the change. So the reason why I say that is traditionally, from my perspective, a portfolio oversees a particular business area and therefore other work and anything going on in the operational area, which means product as well, and BAU, which is really operational area, depending on the work that's being done there, as well as any change that's impacting on that primary business area. But portfolios aren't siloed either. So it's a case of understanding what the change are about, what's going on operationally, what's going on in the change environment within a particular business area. And don't forget the change environment, the operational environment isn't necessarily about changes within the operations itself. You could be dealing something for a client as a support function for a client, or building something for a client, or building something on their site that you're providing the project or the arms and legs to do that. And I think that sometimes gets missed as well. And I think that, as the point as Ricardo makes out, I think this is quite a common problem that a lot of the focus seems to be on the portfolio as a change function only. But that isn't really its broad function is to look at the resources and everything else to manage a particular environment, anything going on within it.
Well, it's up to you how it's set up, isn't it? It's not deemed by automatically that's the case, and I don't necessarily think that's the case of how it is in a lot of organizations. So I think
true,
there's a
Dave.
lot.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think, but one has to look at a sort of a generic view and decide what is a sensible framework. But of course, every organization does things differently. Now, whether they do it right differently or do it wrong differently, that's another question. That's where we need to come in and sort of help them out, if you like.
And that's the point of the discussion. It's like if we've got a strategy and we've got change, we're often put change into a change portfolio. But then how do we get that to balance with the other non-change workloads? And your proposition is that for a particular function, you might be looking at the portfolio, which is that their BAU, their product development, and their change for that business function. But then what about the strategic cross-cutting stuff? Which portfolio does that fit into?
Well, this is why I was saying. I mean, it's a good point. This is why I was saying that portfolios aren't siloed, and they shouldn't be. And the trouble is, a lot of the time they are, and that's because of the way people organize. They organize their budgets, and they organize control and power and things. That, And I saw that at Telstra when I was there. That we had about 5 different portfolios, but there was an overall portfolio of portfolios, if you like. But we all worked together because we're all actually over. There was a cross bleeding across the 5 different areas. But it is, you've got to look at the organization and how they want to work it. And that's the important bit, like you said, So it's just helping them to see that there's a bit more than, because really at the end of the day, the portfolio should be overseeing. And that's when we go back to the business support bit as well. How do we manage that? And I was going to ask a question about support defined as what. Anyway, that's just my view. I mean, that's my experience and my view from various things. So just throw my 10 pounds worth in, I guess, actually.
So who's next, Veronica? Who was I was
So Philip's put in the chat, purpose is where the organisation wants to go. Strategy is the way the organisation is going to get there. Organisation is the vehicle that will drive the strategy. Projects are methodology to rearrange the organisation to follow strategy. And projects may be part of strategic alignment. Oh, sorry, I've lost the... but they are not strategy. And then he's put a question mark, all of which is very sensible. I mean, I think if we flip it around, if we think about strategy to execution, it does seem extraordinary to think that we can execute strategy without involving BAU or daily operations in some fashion, doesn't it? That just doesn't make sense as a link.
That's the big danger, Veronica. I think for me, that's the biggest danger, because at the end of the day, where's your money? Where's your bread and butter coming from? From operations. Your bread and butter is coming from operations. So anything that happens in there, that's what you're trying to keep, sustainable and keep future proof from earning money. And that's why we have change environments it's going to be a bigger impact in a sort of a change environment, like running projects, which, I agree with Philip a lot of what he says. This is this good thing. We need to keep that to one side so we can control that, so we don't bring BAU down to its knees, basically. That's where the money comes, I mean,
yeah.
So I know.
Yeah.
That's all right. We have several hands up. So let's go on the hands. So sorry, people. I didn't say what order they came in. So we'll just go left to right on my screen, which is fair as anything. Okay. So Chris Walters, you'd be first then.
Yeah, just I've got 2 points, but I do want to come back on the very last point, which is that BAU may deliver today's bread and butter, but it's going stale all the time. And tomorrow's bread and butter is coming from change. So that balance does need to be done. And today's bread and butter is no more important than tomorrow's. The big point I wanted to make there was around resourcing. And as ever with portfolio management, there are 2 bits that are really hard to model. Number 1 is change intensity. And that has to be organizationally aligned, i.e. you can't land too many changes in the same organizational unit at the same time. as Kellogg's famously did when they rebranded all of their cereals, and nobody could find any of the cereals on any of the shelves in supermarkets, because the cockerel disappeared and the Rice Krispie men disappeared. So that's a real example of change density in the product space. But most importantly, the resourcing in the organization, an individual is neither fully project, i.e. change, or fully BAU. And therein lies the contention. And no matter how many times you slice and dice your portfolios into sub-portfolios, the reality is most organizations go through a three-stage cycle. They try and do all of the change and all of the BAU. They fail at doing it, and then they readjust and realize that actually there needs to be spare capacity in the operations teams, departments, functions to be able to bring change in. Now that's a hard pill to swallow, and organizations tend to do that when they've failed at trying to beg, borrow and steal, and had both the operations fail and the change fail. So most importantly for me, and very much from a portfolio PMO perspective, there needs to be a single resourcing model that includes BAU and projects, and there need to be allocations, if not accurate. I mean, we're talking broad brush, saying, right, this team need to be 70% on BAU and 20% on projects, and the rest of it is holiday, training, all the rest of it. So that broad brush planning needs to be done. And if in the operational space they're not coping with operational work with the allocation that they've got, then that's not a project. It becomes a project problem, but it's actually a problem to be solved operationally, not in the project, and vice versa as well. So the broad brush resource plans really do need to be, the next level down is individual projects doing some forecasting at the project level, not at the departmental level. And that's forecasting, not planning. That's just, pie in the sky guesswork, saying this project's probably going to land in October and we're probably going to need 2 or 3 operational analysts for a month beforehand. Now, at that level of granularity, the next level of granularity is booking people to tasks on the projects, which needs to be done. Now, that's a really tough thing to do in most organizations, and a lot of organizations don't get past the fail stage because they don't realize that the problem that they've got is holistic. It's neither BAU nor change. Now, the resource managers absolutely know that, because, pardon the language, they're spending every day shitting miracles.
Well, it's just a quick point on that, Chris. What cracks me up is when I hear project people say that operations doesn't have any capacity for my project. I'm thinking, says who? What are operations doing telling you they haven't got capacity for your project? Isn't your project priority not necessarily a matter for them to decide on, but who decides it?
In my mind, this is where the portfolio of everything needs to be understanding the demands, and whoever is the decision maker at that portfolio. So they've got to be able to A, hook into strategy, and B, hook into operational effectiveness.
Yeah, I agree. I think
and then there's a broad discussion that needs to be had to ensure that the people with the right degree of authority are arbitrating if arbitration needs to be done. This goes right back to the point of nodes of accountability.
Yes.
Yeah, and we are talking about leadership in the next session in September, actually, in the next active session. So lots going on in the chat as well. But Sarah, you've been very patient. Let's come to you.
Hi there. Yeah, I've not been to one of these meetings before, so I'm just getting the hang of the formatting.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
So are we, Sarah. So are we.
Yeah, I was intrigued by this subject of this one because it is a very current problem at the moment. I'm working in change in central government department. I usually work in central government departments in change, but at the moment I'm on a very large change program, which is very much affecting operations. So there is a lot of clashing. The strategy in HMRC is to close the tax gap. Operations is about bringing in tax revenue. That can't stop. It is prioritized by and large, but where a lot of it clashes is in the CDIO area because they have a fixed capacity to oversee any given changes to any given system or platform at any given time. But the way they tend to do it.
Sorry, what's CDIO for the rest of us?
Oh, Chief Digital Information Office. It's the IT department. So they tend to have how they tend to merge the two, because a lot of people in operations are very much involved in change, but they need to be empowered to do that. And the way they do that is to, if you're a process owner or a process specialist or a product specialist in operations, that tends to be a service owner. In the IT area, that tends to be a platform owner. If your job is to sort of keep the lights on, so to speak, or keep the income coming in, you are authorized to spend X amount of time on change. So it tends to be a sort of fixed capacity, like 30% or 25% or 50%. You have to put in a request through a gateway to get access to these subject matter experts. That's all authorized. This sort of thing can take ages. It does clog up the machinery of change, but at least it's done in an organized fashion. What they don't do in any central government department, as far as I know, is fill in timesheets, and that's because the unions won't have it. So although theoretically people are allocated to X amount of time on change, we don't actually know how much time they're spending on change. So there's no way to track actual costs in terms of resources, which is interesting. But that's how they tend to do it from an organizational point of view.
I share that observation, Sarah. No one I worked with one that had a go at putting timesheets in, and I don't think it's stuck.
I've had varying experiences with timesheeting in various organisations I've worked in. I mean, obviously, if you want to understand the total cost of change, which includes your internal resources, you can swing way too far. It turns into wood and money and, blah, 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 extensive overhead. But broadly, it is very helpful for keeping sort of everybody relatively, relative visibility of we're doing this work. We are actually doing this work. It's important. And did you know that your, X system that you wanted, we've spent, 12,000 man hours on it. And was that visible before without the timesheets? Probably not. But
it can be difficult. Time in the IT department, but that is the only team they do it in, and that is partly because about 80% of them are. It's largely a commissioning organisation where nearly all the platforms are managed by outsource, by suppliers. So that's partly why they have timesheets.
Right. Yeah. Accountability. Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Chris, your turn.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of the discussion here has been about portfolios and projects. But if we're doing strategy properly, we're starting with objectives. And if we're doing strategy properly, they span the whole organization. So we've got strategic objectives for revenue. How much money do we need to get in to fund change and keep the business running? And those have got KPIs and other things. And then we set up projects in order to make whatever changes are necessary, whether that's in BAU to bring in more revenue and improve things by 5%, or whether it's making massive changes and bringing in 200% more. And so really it comes back to those objectives and making sure that everybody has consensus on what are the objectives strategically and who is accountable for each of those, and have they got the resources coming through the budget mechanism to drive all of those. So the projects or keeping the lights on or whatever else, we need to hit these objectives. And typically then we can break that down into and identify projects that are needed, and we've got to get the funding for them. And that funding will come via the overall strategic prioritization if you have that in place, of course. And the key to that, making that work, is just making sure that everybody is actually on board with the strategy and with the objectives, and that they therefore understand the priorities and work with each other, not against each other. So I think I just wanted to stress that I think we need to look at this from a higher level than projects. We need projects. We can't make anything without projects. But the focus has to be on the objectives and the balance on those objectives.
In prioritization, Chris, we talked about different levels, that very highest level of prioritization, which suggests which areas we're going to deploy our funding in at a course level to drive the business, well, and then where we're going to deploy it underneath that within those areas. And we talked about, I don't want to get sucked in, but we talked about different levels, and one thing that there was if we're only talking about project prioritization, that we've missed the point and a lot of the other organizational machinery to deliver strategy
prioritization and objectives, and of course your funding has to go with it, and that's not funding for projects, that's funding total, right? So if your budget is not aligned to your strategy, you're in trouble, because not only will you not get funding for the projects that we've said are high priority for strategy, we're not going to get funding for them because somebody else has got a higher prioritization in their budget, right? But we're also not going to get the budget we want for high priority objectives in our BAU side because somebody's nabbed that for a top priority project. So we've seen that in many cases, and it's where a lot of stuff goes wrong.
Some interesting points in there, Chris, actually, because obviously some organizations where we work, funding shows up as the constraint. Some organizations where we work, resource shows up as the constraint, one way or another. I've seen both, actually. Sorry, Anthony, one more, and then I think we need to move on to our second point, because this was only challenge one.
Yeah, so very quickly, actually, in some points that Chris made, which I think are very good, when he talks about the objective or the drivers at the strategic level, the question I was wanted to ask or to help review, when we talk business support, are we talking, sort of post office type support? Or are we actually talking about sponsorship and championing type support? And that's why when Chris mentioned that, I was thinking, if we're talking about driving objectives from drivers and objectives strategically, are we talking about support at that level from a corporate level to get behind and champion those changes through? Or are we talking about support in a different sort of method? Or there are two types. That's what that's key for what Chris was saying, that we need somebody, once they've got those objectives, they need ownership of them and therefore accountability.
Yeah, we're going to come to that, Anthony. That's the point of the second section. So we're going to brainstorm pains and issues, but then that part of the answer is to discuss with folks, what do we mean by business support? Firstly, how much do we hate that title? And secondly, it's like, what do we need to support?
It's misleading. Yeah. Cool.
Well, it's a placeholder. That's all it is. But it's got to cover all the above, and we've got a diagram which shows how many different support functions there are, and how do we, if we're looking to connect strategy to delivery and to balance across the organisation and make sure we hit all our objectives, not just the change ones or the performance ones. How do we make this happen? Is it by setting locally focused support functions at each other to try and achieve their particular objective, or is it a way to bring balance across the whole piece? That's where we're going, I think.